Rooftop. Can't beat that. Welcome SEC Media Days as it is Tennessee's day to get in front of the mic, and we will have coverage of that. Videos on YouTube throughout the day of Josh Heupel and also interviews with the three players that will represent Tennessee, and that'll be our own Jacob Warren, Tennessee tight end, Omari Thomas, Tennessee defensive lineman, and of course quarterback Joe Milton. But before we get to that, Tennessee with a major commitment. I'll remind you that portions of the program are brought to you by my friend Andy Mason. Go to andymasonrealestate.com. Best prices, best service in the biz. Nearly 40 years of experience in the real estate biz right there in East Tennessee. If you're making a transaction, do that. andymasonrealestate.com. We're in Nashville, but commitment news on Wednesday as the Vols pick up another big-time commitment as Tennessee's class continues to roll forward for 2024. Caleb Jarreau and Kayla Calhoun are here. Let me start with you. Jarreau, what do you think of Mike Matthews as a pickup? What do we need to know about him?
Yeah, he's probably one of the biggest pickups in this class. He was a target for Tennessee since he was on the market. And really, as soon as Tennessee came out of the race sort of with Ryan Wingo, Mike Matthews was the guy, a five-star wide receiver out of Georgia. He'll fit perfectly in this offense, an offense that'll have receivers leaving this year, and they need to add depth. He ranks as the number 13th prospect in the nation by 247 Sports Composite. So he's probably going to be the highest ranked guy in this class, and he could be a guy that vaults this class into the top 10 in the month of July, and we're not even to the day of a lot of commitments yet. So
no, that would be huge, and it will certainly bring a lot of momentum to the class. I visited with Chris Lowe of ESPN, and he said that's got the next step is stacking these 2 and 3 classes of top talent so you get top depth. Of course, the transfer portal is part of that. Like Georgia, for instance, they don't really have to use the transfer portal. I think that's where everybody would like to be eventually. Tennessee's probably not there yet, but if you can stack 2 or 3 of those classes, you can get there.
Yeah, and a big thing is stacking these classes together so that way you can use the portal to fill needs as instead of using the portal to make a whole recruiting class. And we see every coach at SEC Media Days really talking about when they're asked about the portal, it's a way to supplement. Nick Saban said they brought in 5 transfers, and all 5 are guys where they needed depth and they needed guys who can play on the field right now. You don't see successful programs usually using the transfer portal to bring in a lot of guys to fill depth. So really, you stack on those classes. We see Heupel recruiting quarterbacks. Now, if you can start recruiting some wide receivers and stack a couple wide receiver classes together, get some more big guys up front, then there's no reason to see why he wouldn't have depth and be able to have success here in the future.
Let's turn to Caleb Calhoun. Your impressions of SEC Media Days and who we'll visit with on the program today. Pretty stacked, if we do say so ourselves.
Yeah, I thought we did a pretty good job. We're also doing awesome on the pool, guys. Not to make all y'all jealous.
Yes, a little bit of pool duty as well.
Yeah, before turning to SEC Media Days, I wanted to talk a little bit about Matthews, though, Joe, because this comes right after Braylon Staley committed. And Braylon Staley's a slot guy. Matthews is a wideout. All of a sudden, we're looking at a Tennessee team that's got the perfect combination of receivers for the future already when Squirrel White's only a sophomore. I mean, and so are we getting at a level where Heupel, while there's questions over how he uses the transfer portal and who he recruits, at least at wide receiver, he's going to be able to recruit with Georgia's and Alabama's and anybody he wants now, isn't he?
I would assume so. What wide receiver would not want to play in an offense like Josh Heupel's where you're set up for success? It's a one-read offense, and you have these choice routes where you can get yourself open and get yourself yards. And you know that Heupel's going to recruit quarterbacks. So it's a lot easier to pitch to a guy like Mike Matthews where you say, hey, we have Nico Iamaleava sitting behind Joe Milton ready to play. And behind Nico, we have Jake Merklinger who's going to come in your class and be ready to play. And you have those quarterbacks recruiting wide receivers and guys in these classes. And you do have success. You're going to have a wide receiver factory. And the only thing left, really, Calhoun, is for a wide receiver to make it big in the NFL so Heupel can add that to his list of, hey, if you come here, not only will you get yards in college, but look at Cedric Tillman or Jalen Hyatt, you'll get yards in the NFL too. And I think we're seeing that now with Braylon Staley and Mike Matthews, 2 highly ranked wide receivers in this class.
So we will have, I think a big part of that, before I change gears here, I think a big part of that too, not to say it affected Matthews' decision, I thought he was Tennessee all along, but you do have that NCAA specter that's not hanging over Tennessee anymore with the postseason ban. Never thought they were going to get one, but I guarantee you it was being used against them in recruiting. So Caleb Calhoun, let's turn to you. SEC Media Days, what do we got on tap for the program today? I want to remind everybody that as soon as Josh Heupel and the players talk to the media, we'll have those up immediately on the YouTube channel. If you haven't clicked like and subscribe, I don't know what you're waiting on, but be sure and turn the notifications on as well. So we'll have them visiting with the media and then also some one-on-one interviews. We're excited about today as it is Tennessee Day at day 4 of SEC Media Day. So who we got stacked up today there? Caleb, who are we visiting with? Who's scheduled?
I mean, we are loaded, guys. We got, most notably, yes, Dave spoke with the man himself, Greg Sankey, SEC, brought him on. I was able to get a hold of Josh Pate, talk a little NIL, SEC Conference Expansion action. We got Jimmy Hyams on the show. So we are loaded. We got a couple other people we're going to bring on and tease too for you in a little while. But I mean, this is an epic show. We got a lot of great guys on the show you don't want to miss. Did our own recruiting kind of.
We did. So who we got up first?
Up first, we have Jimmy Hyams.
All right. We'll get to Jimmy Hyams, who is semi-retired. Well, he is retired, but he's working SEC Media Days and still doing some freelance work for the Sports Animal and for us as well. We greatly appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get right to it. After this, it'll be Jimmy Hyams, and you know him well. We visited with him about the repercussions or lack thereof from Tennessee's NCAA investigation, how I think they got off pretty good. So Jimmy Hyams up next. A quick 30-second break as a part of the program is brought to you by Tennessee Cider Company, tncidercompany.com. Use the promo code HAT, get free swag with any order, and you can order that cider from anywhere in the United States of America, just about. I think a couple of states are holding out. Don't worry. tncidercompany.com. Use the promo code HAT. Jimmy Hyams up next.
These mountains hold and defend a spirit far better than moonshine. A drink that holds flavor that becomes necessity. A hard cider made and relished by folk who are as hearty as they are legend. A refreshment that can only be found in one place. With a taste that makes you say, give me 3 bottles of the good stuff. Tennessee Cider Company, where necessity can be found.
This guy's retired, but loves to work, so he's down here killing it as usual at SEC Media Days. It is the one, the only, Jimmy Hyams. Jimmy, I figured this up. This is 25 for me, 25 SEC Media Days. I missed a couple working for a national company with an acronym that we won't mention. But how many is this for you?
I haven't missed one since 1985. So whatever that is that 38, 39?
That is strong, my man.
Whatever it is, yeah. It's football season starts with the media days, doesn't it?
It does. And for some reason, I felt like it today. Monday, I wasn't feeling it, but today I'm feeling it. So back in 1985, I thought that players maybe should have gotten paid. They were nowhere close to that. But
yeah, they were.
Oh, it's true. They were. It's just
it
a little
legal,
bit. That's right. It's a little bit different. And I wasn't doing it at the time. So, but with the NIL thing is so interesting to me because it goes state to state. And now you have Greg Sankey basically kind of throwing up his hands this week and saying, I need help from Congress. Yeah. And I don't know when that help could possibly come. I don't think it's a matter of weeks or months. We might be still talking about years.
I think so. And there's so many things that Congress has to deal with other than this. We were talking with Danny White, Tennessee's athletic director, earlier, and I said, are you confident that Congress could come up with a legislation that would take care of name, image, and likeness? And he said, well, now you're dealing with politics. And so I'm not really, basically he was saying, I'm not confident in anything that has to do with politics. So this thing could be a long way away. It was the first week or so of June that Greg Sankey and 14 schools were represented. All 14 SEC schools were represented when they went to Washington, D.C. They spent 3 days there. They felt good about the conversations. But for them to enact something, they got to get some kind of bill in front of them, and you know how long that could take. So yeah, I think they could be several years away. And by then, who knows what name, image, and likeness is going to look like in reality.
You got an economy, you got the Ukraine thing, and then you got a presidential election coming on. I think that maybe NIL may be a little bit lower than those three.
Well, name something big. Nothing's bigger than name, image, and likeness.
Stop what you're doing and let's get this NIL thing taken care of.
By golly, we got kids making $500 a week. We can't have. It will be interesting to see what transpires, David. And there are a lot of things about name, image, and likeness I like. I'm not crazy about a player that's never played it down for your school getting $2 million. I'm not a big fan of that because it creates a lot of dissension. If you don't think that was the root of the A&M evils last year, you weren't paying attention. When they paid all those players to come in as freshmen, the veterans who weren't getting paid said, "The hell with this." That's one reason they had a losing record. You have to manage it some way. So I would prefer that you get on campus and then earn your way to name, image, and likeness. And I don't care how much it is once you get there. I don't like paying $2 million to get somebody on campus.
No, agreed. So let's turn to a little bit more recent news, and that is Tennessee's punishment by the NCAA. Wide open question. How did it strike you?
I thought it was likely and fair. I had been led all along to believe that the NCAA was not going to give Tennessee a postseason ban. There were several reasons for that, but one of the main reasons was Tennessee was cooperating. And if you cooperate, there was a thought, okay, we're not going to punish innocent bystanders like some of the coaches and players that were there. The other part of that was Greg Sankey was on that Reformation committee. What did that committee say? Don't punish the current players. Let's get rid of the bowl bans. Let's get rid of the postseason NCAA tournament bans if a team is cooperating. And Tennessee was cooperating. So in March, I was very sure Tennessee wouldn't get a bowl ban. I was told the fine could be up to $10 million. They were negotiating it. It ended up being $8 million, so I wasn't surprised by that. I also think Tennessee was negotiating the number on scholarship reductions. But the way I look at it, Dave, it doesn't really hurt them much at all. They've already self-imposed 16. So now it's 12 over the next 5 years. It was a total of 28. And they were allowed to retroactively count those 16. So 12 in 5 years, 2.2 a year, that's not a big deal. Especially when you consider when Heupel got there, they were playing with a shortened roster, and he still was having success. So I don't think those punishments will hurt Tennessee on the field. Few people use all of their visits, right?
Right.
So I don't think that's going to have a huge impact on them. So I think they came out pretty good as far as football.
I don't think it hurts either with the transfer portal because when you and I used to cover recruiting together, you would never boot a guy. You'd do the old medical red shirt, something like that. You would never boot a guy. But nowadays with the transfer portal, it's not unusual. I'm sure Josh Heupel's done it. Other coaches do it to boot a guy. So then you take somebody in the transfer portal. Really, the scholarship reductions, it's nothing to me because you can go make a scholarship tomorrow if you need to.
You can. And also ask this question. If you put somebody on as a walk-on, can you give them a name, image, and likeness deal? And the answer was there was no language in this NCAA sanctions that said you couldn't. So you could take a tight end, Jacob Warren, take him off scholarship, and he does some name, image, and likeness stuff and makes $100,000. Who knows? Just picking a number out of the air. But that's how you could offset the situation of having a reduction of scholarship. So I don't think it's a big deal at all.
We had Off the Hook sports are maybe a small part of that $100,000, but a very small part. So with Jimmy Himes, I'm Dave Hooker. And then as far as you, I thought your reporting was excellent from SEC spring meetings about the scheduling issue. And I don't know how that gets worked out, but I'm afraid that it's just the end result is going to be no more rivalries like Tennessee, Alabama, like Georgia, Auburn. I don't know that it happens tomorrow or next year or even in the next 5 years, but with the growth of the sport, I just have trouble believing that you're going to be able to hold on to those rivalries long term.
I think you can hold on to them if you go to 9 games. If you keep it at 8, and it's only for 1 year right now, if you keep it at 8, you're right. You cannot preserve the rivalries that you have. That's the 7-1 model. If you go to the 6-3 model where you can have 3 permanent and then rotate 6, you can at least keep 3 of those rivalry games. So you got a much better chance if you go to 9. What intrigued me was I am convinced that the Monday of the spring meetings, Greg Sankey thought he had the votes to go to 9.
I think, yeah.
And he was surprised that he didn't. And so they reached a resolution of 8 for 1 year. I think he's still pushing to go to 9. But he did point out when they announced the 8-game schedule, June the 14th, that that was pretty darn tough schedules. Everybody's got some tough games in there, right? So I wonder if when he looked at that he might have softened his position on going to 9. Now, he wants 9, I believe, in part because, one, you can keep the rivalry games. Secondly, you can negotiate with ESPN to get more money. And that's a part of the equation, too. So that was convinced they were going to go to 9 at one point. I'm not as convinced right now. I still think they probably will get to 9. But I'm with you. If they stick at 8, they cannot keep those rivalry games, all of them. So I would be disappointed in that.
Let me bounce back to one other thing as far as the NCAA punishment. I started to jump around. But you had the Attorney General say that they potentially could have sued the NCAA if there was a postseason ban. That could be political posturing.
It was.
You think it's as clear as that, or is it just a sign the NCAA has even less power and only runs a basketball tournament?
You are a volunteer member of the NCAA.
Okay.
So you don't have to be a member of the NCAA. You volunteer. It's a volunteer organization. I thought the lawsuit threat was meaningless.
So that would be like if somebody says you can't smoke marijuana on this job, it may be legal, but you're signing up to work for them. Is that kind of a similar analogy?
Yeah. If that's their policy, if the Yankees say you can't have facial hair, can't have facial hair. So, yeah, I thought that was just a political posturing gesture. I thought it had no teeth to it at all, and I don't think it influenced NCAA at all.
My wife says I can't have facial hair because it's all white now.
Really?
And by the way,
it's not red?
Well, no, I was going to ask you. So you know me. I ask people randomly now, I said, what color is my hair? And they say, oh, you're a blonde.
No.
I mean, isn't that still red?
Yeah,
Jimmy, I mean,
red.
but let's go up and ask 3 people at SEC Media Days, what color is Dave's hair? And they will say blonde. They'll say maybe strawberry blonde. That's what's happening to us. So we're getting old. What's going on?
I don't even ask people what color my hair is.
Just glad I got some.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, compared to some other people here.
There's a multitude of people who lost hair at SEC Media Days. We are not one of them. He is Jimmy Himes. I'm Dave Hooker, Off the Hook Sports. So that was Jimmy Himes. Greg Sankey coming up next. And Jimmy basically told us that he didn't think that there would be any sort of postseason ban. And Jarreau, I think that had to help in recruiting Matthews or anybody else. We'll see if a couple of other people fall forward or fall on this class moving forward, I guess I meant to say. But ultimately, that was looming, and now it's gone. Should help in recruiting.
Yeah, I think for a lot of prospects who are borderline, especially in the SEC East, other head coaches would tell them if it was between Tennessee and their respective school, like, hey, you don't know if they're going to get a postseason ban. When in reality, it was never a high possibility. But if you're a kid committing to a place for the next 3 or 4 years, and there's even in question that you might not be able to participate in the postseason, then I definitely wouldn't choose that school either. But now that it's over and done with, and all the self-imposed penalties have helped lighten the burden that Tennessee has to bear, I don't see any negative recruiting coming from this at all.
All right, with Kayla Calhoun and Caleb Jarreau, I'm Dave Hooker. Coming up next, it'll be Greg Sankey, SEC Commissioner on Off the Hook Sports.
And Craving Wings South North Shore location, where we've heard people say that you can get the best wings in East Tennessee. Pero ¿quién es este? El número 87, Jacob Warren.
I'll just do 6 on my sauce 87, please.
Imposible, señorita. Dale 6 más. Look at these wings. Perfectas, deliciosas, fantásticas.
Man, I don't know what you're saying, but it sounds awesome. How do you say fresh, never frozen in Spanish?
Frescas, nunca congeladas. Make your way to Craving Wings and get you 6 más.
But what was funny about Kate is we were a full continuum of care at that time. We had detox, we had inpatient, we had outpatient. So we were doing a lot of the things that we do now. But now we just do them so much better. It's really a simple program, but we're complicated people. I am what I am, and now I got to do something about it.
You can take your life back. Call Cadis today.
Got cataracts? We can fix that. Never miss another moment. With a little help from Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn at ccteyes.com.
Do you want to own the more that owns every job? Then get to Vassey Lawn and Garden in Cleveland and get you a Toro. I'm David Vassey, here to talk to you about Toro. With a Toro Zero Turn, you'll get more out of every minute and you'll reach the finish line faster. At Vassey's, we like to say, no matter if you're mowing 3 acres a week or 11 lawns a day, homeowners and business owners alike find confidence in equipment they can trust from top to bottom.
Vassey Lawn and Garden, Highway 60 North in Cleveland.
Man alive, it's worth the drive.
Our family has been creating jewelry since 1986, each piece unique with a story all its own. I'm Rick Terry with Rick Terry Jewelry Designs. I'm a jeweler, and I want to be your jeweler. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler. My family and staff look forward to serving you. So please come see us. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut and downtown on Gay Street, right next to the Tennessee Theater.
One of my favorite times of the year is visiting with the commissioner, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Thanks for making the time, Commissioner.
Happy to be here. Thanks for being part of Media Days.
We certainly do appreciate it. And a lot going on, maybe not as hectic as a past couple of Media Days, but one of the things I wanted to get into right from the top, since most of my audience is Tennessee-based, and that is getting that NCAA investigation behind you. And now that everything is done and the SEC is involved in that must be a relief, I would think.
It's always better to be at the end of those experiences than at the beginning. We have an advisory role assigned to us whenever one of our universities is going through one of those processes. I think one of the hard parts that we have to come to grips with in the big picture of the NCAA world is these things just take too long. And part of the penalty that's really not acknowledged is the uncertainty around the program. And it's not simply SEC members that I feel that strongly about the slow pace. But I think globally we need to resolve these things in a more timely manner.
What can be done about that?
Well, I think it's a focus. First, one is that we're going to have very intentional expectations for cooperation and timelines. I think important in the Tennessee case is the role of campus leadership, and the infractions process should be even more supportive, in my view, of campus leaders and the difficult decisions that they have to make in these matters. I do think over time there's been this continuing gathering of working groups and special committees to look at the process, and you generally see a trend of we have to have stronger penalties, we have to have more aggressive penalties. And that's where I would say perhaps you need less aggressive penalties applied in a more timely fashion to strike the right level of oversight and accountability.
That's interesting. How would you grade Tennessee's level of compliance and working with you and the NCAA? Because this goes way back. I can remember being 10 years old and seeing a Sports Illustrated investigation, and the NCAA got involved. But then athletic director Doug Dickey was all about compliance. And that's almost as big of a Tennessee tradition as the checkerboard end zone.
Well, I had the opportunity to work with Doug when he was athletics director still, early when I moved to the SEC in 2002, and still have opportunity. Saw him at the Orange Bowl this year. So Doug was an iconic leader. I would go to this circumstance, tremendous credit to Chancellor Plowman, and then member her team at the chancellor's office level initially. The change in leadership at the athletic director and at football coach level is never easy. It's been really encouraging to work with Danny, to watch some of the change he's led. And I know his focus, like you described with Doug Dickey, is on making sure the program operates within the boundaries and expectations of the rules to which we've agreed. And it's an interesting time to deal with issues as we have changes around name, image, and likeness, changes around state laws, but a lot of credit to the campus leadership provided in the modern area that also is a tribute to the work Doug Dickey did back when he led.
There was no bowl ban, but there was a substantial financial penalty. Speaking in generalities, could we see more substantial financial penalties? Might that be the trend?
We've had a financial penalty attached to a postseason ban. That's a conference policy that is decades old. One of the realities that is around this timing of consideration and decision making for the NCAA. Is there was a constitution committee formed in the summer of 21, and one of the outcomes was that this accountability process, this infractions process, should not penalize uninvolved individuals. And I think that speaks right to the postseason ban, where in a transfer environment, you may have an entirely different roster from year to year. And so you're watching the NCAA adapt to that type of expectation. And one of those resources or tools in the penalty toolbox would be financial penalties. This was new. This was novel. Do I think you'll see more of that approach? I do. But I think the NCAA infractions model is going to have to adapt to some of the modern expectations. And that's really what we're seeing.
I don't know if this is politics or not, but at one point, the Attorney General in the state of Tennessee said that they could possibly sue the NCAA if there were a bowl ban. Is that ever thought of? Is that a real thing, or is that political posturing?
Well, someone who wrote or was involved in writing the letter would be better to comment. My view is you have to allow the administrative process and a voluntary association to work. And one of the problems we have right now with state laws is states are saying in this name, image, and likeness space, they're not actually enforcing their laws. We know of no enforcement action that any state has taken to enforce its own law. And now states are going further, whether it's a letter or through legislation adopted, to say the NCAA or even conferences cannot enforce reasonable name, image, and likeness standards. That is not a long-term viable strategy to support national competition. And so while the NCAA has to change, the state management effort is going to have to adapt too.
So I visited with you this time last year, and I thought the NIL thing would be fixed in a matter of weeks. And I remember you talking about you got the midterm elections coming up, and then the real elections. I'm like, whoa, we're talking about years. And you mentioned that Congress needs to step in and be involved. With all they've got going on, why would they place a priority on placing some sort of universal NIL rule set?
There is, and I acknowledge there's a lot happening. There are economic issues. There's a war in Ukraine. There are, we're seeing military appointments at the center. There are social issues. There's another election coming a year from November. So there is absolutely a lot on the plate of Congress. There's also a reality that the American collegiate athletic system is unique in the world. It is iconic. It draws people in. I've been at games with House members and Senate members, and they look around and say, look at how college athletics brings people together, and we have to protect and support this. And so part of the responsibility that's placed upon Congress is to set federal standards when there is a need. And what I shared Monday is the effort to explain the variety of issues we're facing, and that Congress is the place that can set a clear, uniform national standard around name, image, and likeness activity. I have a responsibility to try to educate and inform our congressional members and leaders about the need for their engagement. The prediction of what will happen is not up to me. It's up to House and Senate leaders and House and Senate members. We traveled about 6 weeks ago, had, I think, even more in-depth conversation, so I'm encouraged about the level of interest. What we need to see is a bill produced by a committee that's considered on either the floor of the House or the Senate that can advance, and that's going to be a continuing work effort.
Talk television contracts, if you can, for a moment. And if you look on the surface, and you know more about the television contracts than I could even pretend to know, but if you look at the deal that the Big Ten got, it looks more lucrative. It looks like perhaps a better deal than what you got with ESPN. What might I be missing?
Well, first of all, there are reports about the revenue access. You actually have to see the revenue access. And you've also seen reports that there may be some challenges around some of the commitments made. I haven't evaluated those. So I actually think the ability to answer that question fully is a backward-looking question. In my time as commissioner since 2015, I walked into 3 different contracts. One with CBS that concludes after this season. One with ESPN for our second level of games. That was originally formed. Both of those contracts date back to 2008, and then an update in 2012 and a network. That's a third contract. The Big Ten had the ability to have shorter term contracts and go to the market at different periods of time than we've had. I think we actually did really well, both financially with our CBS agreement that pivots towards ABC and ESPN. I also know that it's a much more fan-friendly situation where we have the ability next year at Media Days to announce the majority of our kickoff times, to inform our fans of every early kickoff time for the entire season, rather than waiting for 6 or 12 days. And those are trade-offs. Those are value propositions. We'll continue to work to increase our value. I don't think all these stories are fully written on what broadcast agreements mean, and part of our responsibility is to see how we might be able to grow our visibility, provide quality production and presentation, but also develop revenue opportunities.
You had said at SEC spring meetings you hope to get the schedule worked out. I got the sense towards the end of it that maybe it wasn't the resolution that you wanted in terms of the schedule model. How would you describe that week personally and the challenges that you faced in trying to get everybody on board?
What I thought was we collaborated really well, and that's encouraging to me. Leadership is not dictatorship. Anybody can yell and scream. I think leadership is allowing discussion and debate, disagreement, setting aside some of those disagreements and coming to a common solution. And when you look at the announcement around playing 8 games, I thought that was a healthy outcome for a period of time. And then when you see the reaction to the 8-game matchups, the schedules that were introduced in mid-June, I think there was a wow factor for people as they looked at the strength of schedules overall, the high level of competition, and the huge brands that are coming into our football stadiums. I think all of that's positive. At the end of that process, you have to stop and say, well, we have a 24 schedule. We have to figure out 25. And the discussion about 8 or 9 games will continue. For me personally, I'm probably less invested in a particular number and wanting to make sure we have the right reasons, the right purpose behind our schedule. I think we also want to see the highest level of competition in our football stadiums on a regular basis. And 24, I think, to me, is a healthy start along that, achieving those sets of objectives.
What importance do you place on the rivalries? Because as much as I love Georgia, Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama, at some point, if the SEC continues to grow, those may fall by the wayside. But what importance do you place on them?
Well, setting growth aside, I think they're enormously important. I think that's part of our history. And one of the reasons that we needed to slow down the decision-making process is to allow, with all of the change we've had in leadership positions, people to consider the placement of those rivalries in their schedule. And what we did in 24 is honor the vast majority of those games of passion, if you will. If we stay at 8, I can't do that every year with every one of these long-standing, really high-level games of passion that generate interest. And so the pressure point around 8 or 9 games, one of them is the number of annual games that are played, whether it's going to be 1 or 3. I think the good news, whether we play 8 or 9 games, is the ability for us to have everyone seen. So every team played by every other team within 2-year periods, and then home and away over a 4-year period. So there's health there. The question is going to be, is every one of these long-standing rivalry games annually, or are some of them going to pivot to be an every other year circumstance?
Great stuff. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, as we broadcast live from SEC Media Days in Nashville. We'll be in Dallas next year, but Nashville for now, and that's Greg Sankey. And it's Greg Sankey. One of the topics that stuck out the most to me is that Sankey needs help from Congress to get this NIL thing sorted out. Caleb, Calhoun, and I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon. There's a lot of big things going on with our country. So at what point does this NIL thing get figured out? I don't know that we're talking about 2024. It's going to be state-to-state laws, I think, until at least 2025.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't understand why there's even state-to-state laws. I don't think Congress should be in the business of this. You guys are going to see an interview with me and Josh Pate in a minute about how Josh Pate and I both agree there's no way for Congress to get involved in NIL without that just resulting in money transferring away from the players back into the hands of administrators. Okay, so for all you guys who don't like NIL out there and think it's killing college football, just understand what you're arguing for. You're not arguing against NIL. You're just arguing for administrators to get that money instead of the players. Administrators who do nothing, who work for the NCAA and have done nothing but make college football way worse than it could be. So I don't know how you guys feel about it, but what can Congress do to regulate NIL that doesn't just result in money going away from the players?
I'll tell you what, let's see what Josh Pate thinks about it. Be sure and click that like button, subscribe if you haven't to this point, and you have to set those notifications on because we have more coming. Tennessee's players to hit the podium. We'll have those interviews, those press conferences all on the YouTube channel. So set the notifications on. Here's Caleb Calhoun with Josh Pate.
Kayla Calhoun with Off the Hook Sports here, speaking to Josh Pate of Late Kick. Josh, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I wanted to talk to you for a while, actually, about SEC expansion and conference expansions, because I agree with a lot of what you say, that I don't think it's the best for the sport. But I also love what you say about strength of schedule and things like that. Do you think with the SEC getting so big in a year or two that they're going to have to start factoring in strength of schedule when they actually determine the conference champions, not just college football playoff?
I don't think they'll do that because that would say out loud what a lot of us know, which is there's more value behind certain wins because it's tougher to get certain wins. But when you're dealing with the conference now, you got to have the integrity and value of a conference win mean a conference win. You can't say, hey, you beat Florida, therefore we're going to value that more than beating Vanderbilt, although we know it's tougher in a given year to beat Florida than Vanderbilt. So I wouldn't say that. I'd say when you get to the playoff selection committee process, that's when your strength of schedule value really matters. It probably bleeds into the territory you're talking about.
So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, because the reason I bring that up too is that if everything is equal next year when they're playing 8 games, no legitimate person could look at Texas's schedule and Alabama's schedule and think that their record is going to be the same thing, if it's the same.
I mean, yeah, on one hand that's true. On another hand, any given year, it's tough to see the quality of a team 12 months out. We're sitting here right now and don't know the quality of some of these teams in 2023. So it's tough, to sort of speculate what the value of a win on a team schedule will be 12 months from now, if that makes any sense.
Right. What do you think is more important? Because it looks like I think in 2 years we're going to do the 3-6 model, not the 1-7. But either way, you're going to have less rivalries, but you'll play a lot more teams over a 4-year period. Would you rather see college football teams have more annual rivalries or more playing a bunch of different teams over 4 years?
Both. There's a way to accomplish both, by the way. So I would love for you to see. I would not only love to see an enhanced conference scheduling model and a more dynamic factor in that. I'd also love to see a model that's nationwide, not just SEC, where you have a certain amount of guaranteed out-of-conference Power 5 competition. I would love to see a model where you play 9 conference games, you play 3 guaranteed Power 5 out-of-conference games. I really don't care if you schedule an FCS as your 12 team. I don't care about that. I just care that I'm looking at maybe like a Michigan schedule right now, and they will not be challenged point spread-wise in the single digits until November. It should never happen in any major conference. And so I think we'll probably get to a point in the expanded playoff where that's less of a fight.
So our fan base is largely Tennessee. That's where we're based out of. What chances do you give them against Georgia this year? Because last year it was 27-13, but I thought it was 45-0.
Yeah,
Georgia 1-2.
A couple of things to watch. Number one of the big questions Kirby Smart talked to us about yesterday was, will we be able to affect the quarterback, pass rush? Everyone just assumes it'll be there. Well, let's just say maybe it's not there to the degree we're used to with Georgia. And then let's say later in the year they go into Neyland and maybe you're down a corner. Maybe the injury bug has bitten them. Those are the kind of things you can't predict, really. But those are the kind of things that if you combine that with what we know the home atmosphere is at Neyland, think about the Bama game last year, it's not the craziest concept in the world. It's not a machine, okay? It's a team full of people. They're really good. They're better than pretty much anyone in the country. Not invincible. So it's not crazy. It's not a prediction I'm making right now, but it's not crazy.
You brought up a point, because one of Tennessee's biggest advantages now is NIL, because they have the largest NIL collective. But you brought up something that I've agreed with for a while, which is NIL is not going to outweigh the NFL benefits for these five-star athletes. Where does NIL rank in recruiting? Is it just another factor along with location, NFL, coach, or does it have a little more weight maybe than things like location and fans and stuff like that?
It's the first time around versus second time around. So the first time around, for a lot of guys out of high school, it's a huge factor. And it's at least somewhat a factor for 90% of kids. It's a major factor for a certain chunk. When you talk about the portal, it's interesting because it's so much more transactional. You rarely, for instance, see photo shoots and whatnot with kids in the portal. They don't care about this stuff anymore. They want to know the nuts and bolts, ins and outs. Can you develop me? It's very transactional. What does the NIL market look like? And so it matters everywhere. But there's still, and this goes underreported, but there is a large chunk of the student athlete population out there that understands just because you're the highest bidder doesn't make you the best place for me to play. Now there's going to be an NIL market for a player, but I can tell you, not the names, but I can tell you a number of players I have knowledge of just this past cycle who turned down additional easily 5 figures worth of money per year to go to a place because they knew it wasn't the best fit for them.
And overall, because Sankey talked on Monday about NIL wanting Congress to get involved, my concern with that is there any way for Congress to get involved that doesn't just involve transferring money out of the hands of the players and back into the hands of executives and officials?
No. It's a short answer. No. You don't have a way to do that. And I haven't sensed any confidence from anyone here, in an official capacity at least, that they will have much success on that front.
He's Josh Pate with Link to Josh. This is Caleb Calhoun with Off the Hook Sports. Caleb Calhoun with Off the Hook Sports. You guys have a great rest of your day.
It's Caleb Calhoun and Josh Pate. Caleb, some of your takeaways from your conversation with Pate?
I think what really stood out with me was that Pate and I both agree that it's laughable for the SEC when they expand to 16 teams and you're playing an 8 or 9 game schedule and so many different games are going to be played. It's laughable for them to act like every conference win is equal. Okay, and the idea that they don't want to factor in schedule strength to determine their conference champion is going to be hilarious next year when you look at Texas and Alabama's schedules. And you just, if the teams are the same this year that they were last year, if all the teams that they play are the same next year that they were last year, it's laughable to think that Texas and Alabama's, if they have the same record, would have the same value.
Yeah, but couldn't we say the same thing about Georgia's schedule this year, or even Tennessee's schedule? I think if you're part of a conference, I don't know how you would weigh that and view a schedule differently if that's what you're handed by the conference year in and year out.
Well, the reason it's the same, so Georgia plays in the East and so does Tennessee and everybody. So your goal is to win your division, and relatively divisional teams almost do play exactly the same schedule. There's only, out of 8 conference games, 2 games are different from any team in a divisional game. But with no divisions and an 8-game schedule and 16 teams, the door's open for, there are 3 SEC teams that have totally different schedules next year, like 7 different games. And I'm just thinking, I don't think that's theoretically possible at that point to say that the champion is real based on record in that way.
Jarreau, I would argue this, though, that any of those teams, if they don't play as tough of a schedule because of the rotation, or they do play a tougher schedule, if you can't be at the top 12 at the end of the year, then you're not in the top 12 at the end of the year. I don't believe you deserve to be for a national championship. I mean, ultimately, you've got some wiggle room. We're not talking about the top 2 where a bad schedule could put you in a bad position. We're still talking about the top 12.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we see this college football playoff with the 12 teams, the drop-off from 1 to 12 will probably be massive. So I agree that beating Georgia and beating Vanderbilt should not weigh the same in the new conference scheduling. But I also agree with you. I don't know how much it will matter because the difference between 12 and 13 probably will be easier to decide than right now we have the difference between 4 and 5.
Well, what I would say to push back, though, is, again, we're not talking about college football playoff. They're going to factor in the schedule. I'm talking about when the SEC is selecting the top 2 teams to play for the SEC championship game. I think the SEC themselves should factor in schedule strength at this point.
Well, I mean, I understand that too, and you're going to have a log jam, so you're going to have some sort of tiebreaker. We've had that situation crop up before where there was a three-way tie towards the end of the year at one point. So whether they go by points scored against common opponent or whatever the case may be, that's ultimately, I think, the way they're going to have to work it out. I don't know how you could weigh a conference win against one opponent as higher over another conference opponent. That to me seems even more complicated than the system of the three-way tie, which is pretty complicated already. So what do we have coming up next, Caleb?
Got a couple more interviews. We will speak with Chris Lowe. We're going to bring him in. And you and him had a lot to say, so we'll talk a little bit about what he said. We got a lot more to tease for you guys pretty soon.
Chris Lowe, after this, stay tuned. Off Those Sports Live from SEC Media Days in Nashville, Tennessee.
From the heat and cool off with some cold draft cider. With free samples on draft and lots of flavors to choose from, Tennessee Cider Company prepares a hard cider that's easy to enjoy. Made from our home, so you can take it to yours. Add us to your list for shopping and fun experiences. You'll be glad you made the trip. Find our cidery in the Mountain Mall on the Gatlinburg Parkway. Sip smart. Sip the good stuff. Sip Tennessee Cider Company.
From SEC Media Days in Nashville, Tennessee, it is Chris Lowe. You know him well, ESPN senior writer. He covered Tennessee for a number of years, continues to break stories for Tennessee and throughout the SEC. Chris, I appreciate the time. How are you?
Good, Dave. It's good to be with you, man. It's quite an event here. It gets bigger every year, it seems like, doesn't it?
It does. A little bit bigger than it was like five guys covering a Tennessee football practice. You, me, Brent, and that was I'm trying to remember, somebody from the Chattanooga Times.
Andy Staples was there for a while, yeah.
Yeah, we watched a lot of football, of which we probably got like 2% of knowledge out of it.
Well, that's back when you could actually watch practice. You know, when you could go to practice and watch it.
Yeah.
I know that seems like archaic now. No coach lets you go to watch football practice. But, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you could actually go to watch practice. And you got a little bit of a feel for the team. Those days are long gone.
Yep, they are. I feel like Tennessee got a pretty good deal out of the NCAA investigation. I thought the judgment was fair, and I didn't think Tennessee deserved a postseason ban. What did you think about it?
Well, I guess it depends on the way you look at it. If you look at it from other schools in the last few years that got postseason bans, Oklahoma State in basketball. I mean, you go back to Ohio State, they got skewered pretty good for selling tattoos. You know, apparel for tattoos, the parlor. I thought what Tennessee did, Dave, going to be the model for the way schools handle these things going forward. Is they're going to try to jump on it quick. They're going to have the chancellor, the president, chancellor on down, really sort of take a hold of this, bring in a firm like Tennessee did, be willing to pay a ton of money in legal fees, a ton of money in fees to the NCAA, and just basically say, you know what, we didn't know anything about it. This was not on our watch. We've got everybody, coaches, players, staff members who are part of this and the NCAA's mercy. And this is a different NCAA now than there was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. There's a trend, a movement within the organization not to punish schools and players, not part of the violations. And when you look at the current Tennessee players, there's really nobody on there, certainly not on the coaching staff. There was a part of it. But I do understand how, if you're another school, certainly one that has the NCAA's wrath, and you're seeing 200 infractions and 18 level 1 violations, coaches admitting to paying players and paying for motel rooms, bringing parents to campus illegally. You look at it and say, well, Tennessee, how does Tennessee get off? Where's the justice there? So I see both sides of it. I do think Tennessee did a really good job of navigating this situation. Donnie Plowman, the chancellor, deserves a lot of credit. Randy Boyd, the president, and then certainly Danny White. The way they just sort of all worked together and did everything and anything they could to make sure that they avoided a postseason ban.
Did you think there was a chance they could get a postseason ban recently?
Early on, but not as a process for them. I was told by somebody pretty close to the situation and had been saying all along that once Tennessee went to Cincinnati for the hearings that they would not get one. I think it was really almost already worked out. But I think the Committee on Infractions wanted Tennessee to come, want them to appear before the Committee on Infractions. Almost, pardon the phrase, but to get a little piece of their high, and say, tisk, tisk, you better not do this again. But I think at that point it was pretty much done. They were not going to get the postseason ban, would instead have to pay an $8 million fine, which is really closer to $9 million when you include all the other fees and fines, et cetera. And so, no, I didn't. At the end, I did not expect them to. And people say, I've had people say, well, do you think they should have? Not really. Not if the NCAA truly wants to protect coaches and players who are not part of the violations, then I don't know how you punish this group of Tennessee players and coaches.
No, I see that. And I tend to think that this new way of thinking is a better way of thinking because it is Jeremy Pruitt who caught the brunt of this. And if I'm a coach moving forward, I think of Pete Carroll, who was able just to kind of run off when things have gone so south at Southern Cal. And if I'm a coach now, I'm going to think twice before I'm doing these things because it hurts me.
Yeah, and that's the thinking, that we want to punish the people who are actually committing the violations, the coaches, the assistant coaches, administrators that sort of are negligent and look the other way. That's who the NCAA wants to go after. I thought Jeremy Pruitt was going to get hit pretty hard, Dave. He honestly got hit a little bit harder than I thought he would. 6 years is a long time. He didn't get any time. And I'm not defending him. I mean, what happened there on his watch was sloppy. It was reckless. A lot of things, a lot of rules were broken. But I thought he might get some credit for time served because he hasn't coached college football for 2 years. His show cause goes through 2029, which really, for the most part, in college makes him unhireable. I've talked to a couple coaches here this week about Jeremy Pruitt. They've all said the same thing. He is a heck of a defensive football coach. But right now, with this show cause hanging over his head, and remember, he's got a chance to appeal. He and his attorneys could very well appeal. But right now, with this 6-year show cause, a year's suspension, if the NCAA would let him to come back, makes him pretty much unhireable at this point. Now, things change. If he were to win an appeal and the show cause were reduced, maybe the suspension is not as penal, then maybe somebody does bring him on, at least initially, as an analyst. But actually, having talked to some coaches about that here this week, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
As far as Josh Heupel, what's the next step in his program that needs to be addressed or developed? Because he's done an awful lot of things right, but I think even he would agree that some things such as maybe high school football recruiting could be a step better.
Yeah, we continue, and along those lines, continue to build depth. That's still the difference between Bama, and I know they beat Bama last year, but Bama and Georgia, the elite teams in college football, Ohio State, Michigan, is quality depth. And that's where you're right. You've got to really continue to bring in great recruiting classes in high school ranks. They seem to be recruiting very well. I give Josh and his staff credit. With all this NCAA cloud hanging over their head the last year or so, they've recruited at a really high clip. I think the NIL has helped them. They've been very aggressive in the realm of NIL. And that's, I think they've been able to attract players that probably they wouldn't have been able to get over the last few years because of that. Because every kid, I don't care. I love to hear this narrative out there. Well, no, I'm not taking any money, or no, this kid's not looking for money. They're all looking for money. They're all looking for their best deals in some form or fashion. And when I say all, there's always a few exceptions. But Tennessee's been really aggressive. Their collective Spire has been very aggressive. They've been front and center about what their mission is. But I think stacking another recruiting class or two on top of each other to build the kind of depth and create competition on the practice field. You were there in the late 90s or certainly the early 2000s when you'd go to practice, and Tennessee had all these guys that were really good football players that weren't starting.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to scrimmages, and sometimes it was hard to tell who were the second unit of defensive linemen versus the first unit. And that's the way it is at Georgia. I mean, Georgia keeps having umpteen guys drafted every year, and there's no fall off. I mean, their defense this year at Georgia will be really good again this year. So that's where Tennessee's got to get to. And I think the way you do that is you just keep stacking classes on top of each other. And also, and this is important, in this world, being able to fill in gaps and plug holes in the transfer portal. And Tennessee, to this point, has done a pretty nice job of that.
Yeah, I remember when Albert Haynesworth started becoming a thing, and I think we were asking, and you were there, we were kind of comparing him to John Henderson.
Right.
And as Philip Fulmer said, he's got that special sting. And I'm thinking, there's another guy that's special on the defensive line. That's the kind of depth Tennessee had.
Well, I mean, you look at the 98 and 99, 2000 teams, great football teams, 97. Certainly Pate is the guy that faced that 97 team. But when I think of those teams, I look a little deeper, and I look at the front sevens on defense. I mean, you had Haynesworth, and he was later in 2001, but you had Leonard Little, you had Darwin Walker, you had Billy Ratliff, you had Jeff Coleman, you had Al Wilson there at the middle linebacker. Again, front seven to me, especially them, but especially even more importantly now on defense is where you win and have a chance to play for championships. And those front sevens from 96, 97 to 2001, 2002 were exceptional. And you look at where those guys came from. They went out and recruited guys. Sean Ellis is another one. They recruited guys from North Carolina and South Carolina, from Georgia, from up along the Atlantic coast. They went out to Texas and got players. So they were able to sort of have long tentacles and get players in from all over the country. And I think that's what it's going to take for Josh and this program to get to a point where they're a top 5 team perennially. And I don't think they're too far off. I really don't. I think he's recruiting at a high clip. He's one of the best play callers, or certainly has one of the best schemes in college football. No one's been able to figure it out yet, going back to UCF. So you couple that with a really disruptive defense with the kind of defensive players who are NFL players. I mean, I think they're going to get there maybe sooner than anybody would have thought they would. I mean, did you expect them to win 11 games last year?
No.
I mean, I thought it would be, Butch Jones, as much flack as he gets, some of it I think is unfair. He won 9 games in back-to-back years. And I told somebody, when do you think the next time will be that Tennessee win 9 games in back-to-back years? And I thought it would be a long time. Well, now all of a sudden, here comes Josh Heupel, and they got a chance to do it this year.
Yeah. So what are their expectations for this year? Because when somebody asks me that, I don't want to be the rah-rah guy. Yeah, I think you know me well enough. But I look at their schedule, and I think it's fair to expect 10 regular season wins. And I can't believe I'm saying that.
Well, last year everybody asked me, what to you is a sure sign of progress in year 2? And my answer was the same across the board. Whoever asked me is to beat one of the big 3, at least one. Because they were like 4-38 against Georgia, Alabama, and Florida over the last however many years. And I said, so to beat one of those teams, well, they beat 2 of them. They beat Florida and they beat Alabama. So I think this year, if they can beat 2 of them again, that would be an unbelievable response to last year, and then get to 10 wins. What's realistic? See, I think it's hard to put a number on it, because if they can continue to play at the level they did when they ended last season, then I think they're going to be a tough out for everybody. Even with Hendon getting hurt last year, they go to the bowl game and they beat Clemson. See, I think the key is everybody talks about Joe Milton. I think Joe Milton will be a really good quarterback. I'm not ready to step out there and say he's going to win the Heisman like some people are, but I think defensively, can they take the step forward defensively? If they do, then I agree with you. I think 10 wins is very realistic. But you know what, Dave? I think Texas A&M will be better than people think they are this year. Tennessee plays A&M. We know how good Georgia is. They have to play at Alabama. You think Alabama will be ready for that game?
Yeah.
They go to Florida. Now, I don't think Florida's going to be a great football team, but I still think playing down there early in the season is always hard. And here's one. I would watch Kentucky, too. Kentucky is at Kentucky. Tennessee's had their number. But they bring Liam Cohen back as their OC. They bring Leary in as their quarterback from NC State, who has a ton of snaps. That's a game that, even though Tennessee has really just sort of beat up on Kentucky, that's one I would watch, because I think Kentucky has a chance to be one of the bounce-back teams in the league. But no, I like Tennessee's team. I like the culture that Josh has built. I like the fact that he is pretty much who he is all the time. He's not up or down. And I think his team has played that way. I think that's very reflective of the way his team has played the last 2 years. And I agree when he says the best is yet to come. I think unless something happens and they avoided this NCAA deal, had they gotten slammed with a year or two postseason ban, that could have stopped the train a little bit. But they've now are on the other side of that. I think they got a chance to get back to where Tennessee was in the 90s, in the early 2000s in the Philip Fulmer, and that's being what I would call an upper echelon, top 3, top 4, top 5 SEC program.
Great stuff. He's Chris Lowe, ESPN senior writer. I'm Dave Hooker. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports. That was Chris Lowe. Coming up next, former Vol, a VFL, Ramon Foster, 104.5 The Zone. We break down Tennessee at SEC Media Days, day 4, but it is, of course, Tennessee Day. So don't forget to have your eye on that YouTube channel, notifications on, because we'll have interviews throughout the day with Tennessee's Josh Heupel and, of course, Tennessee's players representing the Vols. Ramon Foster up next, Off the Hook Sports.
Kayla Calhoun here with former Vol and former Pittsburgh Steeler. Played 11 years starting in the NFL, Ramon Foster. Ramon, thanks for doing this. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Also, West Tennessee representative.
That's
together,
true.
Memphis, Ripley, absolutely. We got to bring that up.
Yes, that's true. The best part of Tennessee. I joke with people on our live feed all the time that the best recruiting for high school in Tennessee is West Tennessee by far. It's not even close.
You know what I call it?
What do you call it?
Best Tennessee, not West Tennessee.
See? Love that. Love that.
Even though I'm a Middle Tennessee resident now, and I love Knoxville too, I, of course, got to go where home is and just say best Tennessee. You get it, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot I want to touch on now that we have you here, but first, I actually am going to come out of left field for something real quick, which is that you were part of a draft class in 2009, probably the most overlooked draft class ever out of Tennessee, because you and Arian Foster both became undrafted, longtime elite starters in the NFL. And there was an undrafted player from Tennessee this past year who played guard just like you did.
Who are you talking about?
And Jerome Carvin, and another West Tennessee kid, actually.
Yeah, you see the trend?
Yes. And I feel like he might be getting the same short stick that you guys got. What do you think?
Definitely. I think he was in the football world probably too familiar, I guess, but didn't know a whole lot about him. The new system that you had in Tennessee under Heupel, he played a lot, ended up just being the older guy in that group, just kind of took a back seat to a lot of stuff. And Trey Smith kind of went through that too, although he was a draft pick. Sometimes I feel like they make Tennessee linemen have to prove it a little bit more than others. But Darnell definitely kind of broke that trend for us, and I'm hoping that will end up in a pipeline. But I feel like this Jerome is going to be fine. I know he has the mentality. He has the work ethic, and his film is good too. Sometimes coaches don't know how to judge players by simply their measurables sometimes, and he wasn't a combine invite guy, so you have that knock against him. So now his tape is what's going to be his biggest advocate for him moving forward. And that's the thing about the NFL too. If you can, they will. And I think he's a guy that possibly can. And the best part for him is this: goes to a really good organization that knows how to evaluate talent. Them drafting Trey, I know it still went 6th round, but that speaks about him even going into camp and becoming a starter. It was never an item could Trey play or not Trey Smith. It's an item, health. And the fact that he was a day one starter for them was huge. And him also being able to mentor Jerome too while he's in Kansas City, I think it's going to be fascinating. I sent Trey Smith a text message last week to tell him keep crushing it. And of course, a guy like him, we Vols usually look out for one another too. Teaching the ropes. So I'm not really worried about Jerome not having a career. I'm actually looking forward to see what his path looks like.
Yeah, I agree. And it just seems like in general, and I do this covering recruiting and covering the NFL draft, why is interior offensive line, it seems like the hardest position to scout talent for?
Because they don't have many people that know how to look at it. I think fans hear offensive line anytime, it's usually negative. It's only for penalties. We don't get praise for doing actually good plays. We just simply do our job. And the fact that some scouts may have a blind eye to what's a good block or a good play. Just because you give up pressure doesn't mean it's a bad play. The quarterback has the opportunity to get the ball off. You do those types of things. Or it may be the idea that a guy may fit a system better. So you got to be strategic on who you're picking and who you're going after. It's always a conversation of what's good and what's not. On the interior. Tackles, we know. They need to look like basketball players that are big dudes. We can fit them centers. Usually a guy, if he's quick enough, strong enough, and he can play in the NFL. When it comes down to guards, and that's the reason you don't have many in the Hall of Fame either. The eyes of what's a good play versus a bad play, or what's a good guard versus a bad guard, I think it's a very thin line, and nobody knows how to judge it just yet.
Turning it to Tennessee a little bit with guard, it seems like guard is the most underrated part of Josh Heupel's offense, because even though he likes to go for the big plays, those big plays are nothing if he doesn't have that run game that he's doing every day, right?
100%. Spraggins, if I'm not mistaken, will be a high draft pick this year if he stays healthy and have another good season. He was on an early watch list this offseason of being a guy that can potentially be a first day, second day type of guy. So I'm excited for that. But you're right. The guards in this offense mean a lot. And I'm glad that they're starting to get some interior linemen as far as high caliber recruits coming in under Heupel right now. And him also, one of the first things he said was the run game has to be a big part of my offense. Don't let the passing that we do affect what you think we don't do on the ground. So I'm excited to see what these young guards do. I think Jordan Addison is one, or Addison Nichols is one of those young guys that can come along. And of course, Mays up the middle, anchoring those dudes. The run game, but the interior three will be huge. So I'm hoping also for our sake, being a VFL, that Jerome actually does crack the 53-man roster this year, because it just, the more numbers and bodies you have at the upper level, the better it does for you in recruiting and for your college in general.
Yep, and talking about Heupel's system and guards, and then tackles and going to the line a little more broadly now.
Yeah.
You mentioned Darnell Wright. He flipped from left tackle to right tackle last year, which was one of the most brilliant moves Josh Heupel did.
Yeah, definitely.
But I seem to remember your senior year, an offensive coordinator who didn't handle rotating offensive linemen too well.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, I know.
So how do you strike that balance where you flip or don't flip offensive linemen?
Well, that system right there, I think Dave Clawson's the coach. He's at Wake Forest right now. I think I hate that we were a trial and error type of team for him and doing those types of things. One, we didn't have the personnel to do that, even though it was actually awesome for me on the next level to show I could play both sides for the success of our team. I don't think it was a good thing to do in those moments because we didn't have the personnel to flip right and left. It became predictable. We go out there early in the season. Heck, Florida's calling out the play is coming right here because our tendencies and how obvious it was and the stuff that we were doing throughout. I know now that he's gotten away somewhat from that system, but it can be a good thing for guys if you're capable and want to learn it. We had a group of older guys that were willing to learn it, although I will say I was a little resistant to it because to change sides, and it got to a point, well, this is just what we're going to do. But there's a saying in the NFL as far as, Darnell going from left to right is the more you can do. As a young guy, that is the phrase that you have to carry with you because the more you can do, the longer you stay around. What has to happen is you have to become an older guy that learns this too. The more you can do, the less you get paid because now money's involved in it. And if you're not a master of your craft at a certain point, then you're probably going to be out of the league, especially if you're a guy that moves from one position to the next year after year. So I'm hoping for Darnell, if he starts off on the right side, he sticks. Or if they decide to move him to the left side of the line, which he's that athletic. I think so many people have been talking about how athletic he is. Then that'll be great for him too, because we know like every other spot in football, the left tackle position is a prime spot.
Right. It's funny. That's the age-old reminds me of the LeBron-MJ debate because LeBron can do more.
Yeah.
It's just what MJ was good at. He was amazing at.
Amazing. Yes, yeah. I'm Team Jordan, by the way, just so you know.
Totally understand. I respect both, but I do think Michael's better.
I do too. Yeah, that's where I'm at with it. We can love both.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
we can love it.
Exactly. So thinking about that and transitioning it to this offense, there's, you talked about how it actually helped you somewhat for the NFL.
It did.
How do you balance, because the rules are a little different in college football. There's the blocking downfield that's allowed, which Josh Heupel takes full advantage of.
Yes.
How do you balance the X's and O's versus player development? Because I will say with David Cutcliffe, player development was amazing under him.
Yes, it was. It was big under Coach Cut. That 07 season that we had under him, we were like a well-oiled machine because of player development and how he challenged us and whatnot too. But the X's and O's, I say this for rookies. Let's go for Valus. Let's go for almost anybody that's in this. Jalen Hyde's in right now. As far as some of the young guys, right, offensively, in the X's and O's. Your rookie years is making a splash. Whatever you do well, do those things. If you want to send Jalen on go routes the entire practice or the entire season, do that well because you get an opportunity to establish yourself as a pro. Once you establish yourself, that's when you start to build your platform of, look, I'm multifaceted. I can do other things. If you're running back that hits the edge and go 99 yards, do that first, okay? Because now we got a sticking point and we can branch off from there. And that's what I think one thing Hypo has kind of shown in his, or has talked about a lot in his offense. Look, you see us tricking defenses, but we're actually teaching these guys how to run routes, how to scheme up defenses, how to read the safeties, how to come back or go over the top of linebackers. I think that's very unique. And the longer he's at the University of Tennessee, the more I'm hoping the guys that go to the NFL under his tenure will actually show that at the next level too. Jalen Hyde has a big task. He has to be able to show that the Tennessee offense develops wide receivers. Right, wrong, fair, unfair, that's just how it's got to be because you are a representation of what Josh Heupel, the University of Tennessee offense is for young guys that may want to come and say, Tennessee's going to make sure I go to the NFL.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that had to be a big thing for you because Philip Fulmer was known for developing offensive linemen.
That played a huge part in it. It really did. When I committed to the University of Tennessee, I knew they developed linemen. I knew I was going to have to work and prove myself to become a starter, but they develop offensive linemen. And me going into the NFL, even as an undrafted, my knowledge, my technique, and my understanding of how to play physical came from the University of Tennessee.
And is it important to? I heard Mike Kivin say this one time, where it's like when you talk about schemes and installing X's and O's, but he said, but you don't want players that are young. You prefer them play fast and physical to think too much. Is that more important?
100%. That's all you really want. What was told to me was this: as an undrafted guy, it's like, we know you can play, but if you show some fights, you will make it here on this football team. And you know what I did? Play fast, and I fought, literally and figuratively. Sometimes I had to get into some fights in camp just to prove myself, because it is young 22-year-olds and even younger now, some 20-year-olds going to the NFL with guys that's already got 8 years on you. So if you don't show you belong or that you're willing to fight for what you want out of it as a young guy, you're going to be washed out. A lot of people ask questions like, how didn't that guy make it? One, probably mentally just couldn't stomach, guys been better than him. That is a thing too. Or just physically not willing to fight. Like a lot of guys going to college, you know how recruiting goes. They'll give you your spot sometimes, or you're promised like, hey, look, halfway through the season, we're going to work you in. In NFL, it's not that. Either you do or you don't. And being young and fast and fighting and finishing plays a huge part in sticking around in NFL. But coaches are quick to say, what kept you around in year one won't keep you around in year two.
Right. So thinking about this year with Tennessee and talking about the SEC as a whole, do you think what do you think their chances are to beat Georgia in November this year?
In Neyland, I'd almost give it 50-50. We got to see how Georgia feels. No. But this is also coming from a guy in my era of playing from 04 to 08. We fared well against the Dogs.
I would never forget that 07 game y'all played Georgia where y'all just manhandled their defensive line.
Seriously, and I know they're a different Georgia now. And I've actually talked to some people around that organization that says Tennessee is the one team that we circled that we still hadn't figured. So when I hear that, when I talk to people that I know, and I have the understanding that, look, we can play well with Georgia. It's got to be clean. But I look at Georgia as a team that we can compete with. If we lose and it's only about 3 to 6 points, we're closer, and probably more close than what Kirby would actually want to feel the pressure of the Vols being that close. That offense, say what you want to, does confuse and put teams' defenses in a bad spot. And if you have a defense led by Tim Banks that can get off the field or create chaos and actually utilize those outside rushers, D tackles, and hopefully cornerbacks and safeties that you've got, and also actually having a middle linebacking core now, I don't see why not.
And what's intriguing about that game this year is, well, you played on the first team I remember that was in for Tennessee that was an important November game.
Yeah.
Because typically Tennessee is like, oh, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, let's sleep through it. But that year Kentucky was good.
Yep.
You'll had to play Darren McFadden in Arkansas.
Come on, man.
and actually a really dangerous Vanderbilt team that year. And what do you think how important do you think it is just for the school itself to finally be able to play these meaningful November games like Georgia?
But they're big. And also I say this too, you also get a different version of each teams. That's one thing we always kind of said about the Florida game too. It came early where when Florida was really, really trucking and good, then you really don't stand a chance. While we playing rivalry games or whatever you want to call the Tennessee-Florida game, rivalry, not rivalry, why we playing them that early. But now you have the opportunity to really just let teams grow, let quarterbacks figure themselves out, and having Georgia that late or Kentucky, if they find another quarterback and offensive line to produce points and whatnot, it's exciting. It's almost like an NFL schedule. Like the SEC know what they're doing. They schedule these games to be good. I recently saw the LSU schedule. We were talking about them on our show. LSU has Texas A&M the last game of the season. That's not a throwaway. A&M embarrassed LSU, if I'm not mistaken, last year, because I think they had the opportunity to be in the college football playoffs. Like, they're strategic in setting this up, and that's why it just means more in the SEC.
That's true, and I am one of the people that has the hot take that LSU's winning the West this year again. I got the repeating. Yes.
Okay.
Our site thinks I'm an LSU homer just because I think I just think that there's a lot of talent in Louisiana.
It
They're
is
the only Power 5 school, and they probably have the best head coach they've had since Nick Saban.
So I was going to say, and Brian Kelly can coach his butt off.
He can.
Period. Yes.
He absolutely can. Ramon, thanks so much for doing this.
No
really
doubt.
appreciate it. You have a great one. Enjoy the rest of your time at SEC Media Days.
We'll see what turns up. I know Alabama's coming through here, so we'll see what happens.
Nick Saban's very political speech. We're going to play very hard this year.
Rat poison and stuff like that. Yeah, 100%. But it's been fun. I'm enjoying it.
All right. Thanks a lot. With Ramon Foster, this has been Caleb Calhoun with Off the Hook Sports.
That was Ramon Foster as we broadcast live from SEC Media Days Day 4. It is the Vols. Coming up next, Ryan McGee of ESPN in 30 seconds. Stay tuned. Off the Hook Sports.
A hard cider that's easy to enjoy, one that's crafted to perfection. You need Tennessee Cider Company. Some say it's the signature cider of the South. Others say it's the cure to your craving. They all say you'll savor every sip. With a selection of ciders free to sample, all it takes is one taste. Visit tncidercompany.com for more information, as well as to shop our ciders and merchandise online. Thirsty yet? Doors open at 10 a.m.
Absolutely love visiting with this guy, Tennessee alum and one of the best in the biz, author, host. He does it all. Ryan McGee. Ryan, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. You never say no. You know, that's the key. Everybody's like, you're so busy. I'm like, yes, because if I say no, somebody else is going to say yes, and they won't call again. So, yeah, that's the deal.
You're also the best. I steal your dad jokes on Twitter that you leave for your kids.
Well, it's funny. My daughter just graduated high school, and so we've had the conversation. Like, what do I keep doing the dad jokes or not? And I think if I don't do them, she'll be mad at me. So we'll see.
I've got one for you.
Okay.
Do you know Stephen King's son name is Joe? And I'm not Joe King.
That's I'm stealing that. Totally stealing it. That's the thing, too. People are like, where do you come up with them? In the beginning, I would come up with them, but then people started sending them to me, like on Twitter. And so I just was shamelessly just take it and post it and act like it was my own. So, yeah.
It's called sampling.
Well, there's a lot of people in this room that do that anyway. So I was like, I do with dad jokes.
Tell me about Tennessee.
Yeah.
You and I have seen some really lean years.
Yes.
But we go back to the 90s and early 2000s when they were pretty special.
Yeah.
Ma, what a ride it's been, and I think they've got an answer in Josh Heupel. What do you think?
I do too, and Danny White, you know, and I would even go to Dante Plowman, you know, the chancellor. You see the way that she and Danny White handled this, you know, this NCAA stuff. The only reason that kept in the postseason was because the chancellor and the athletic director got out ahead of all of this, you know. And so it is, you cannot overstate the importance of the chancellor, the athletic director, director and the head on the same page. You just can't. And, what you and I have seen over the years is that when the athletic director and the coach don't see eye to eye, or the chancellor and the athletic director don't see eye to eye, or any one piece of that, there have been years where none of the three of them saw eye to eye. And so when everybody is on the same page, and they know that we need to have discussions about things, it makes all the difference in the world. And so that's why I have confidence. And I do think Heupel's the guy. And there's a confidence about him. No one's ever questioned his ability to move the football. The only question left to be answered is, can you sustain it long term? How good of a coach are you without Hendon Hooker behind center? There's still a lot of that out there, but I have confidence that you can keep this rolling.
Now, and I wonder too, my question with Josh Heupel is the high school recruiting.
Yeah.
Does that take the next step? Because I don't know if you can live on the transfer portal forever. Maybe you can, but I don't know that.
You can't live off of it long term. It's funny because I've had this conversation with a lot of coaches this week, and what they've said is you have to find your balance. If you're Georgia, you don't need it at all. And they don't really use it. If the key of the transfer portal should be, and Brian Kelly said this to us, the key to the transfer portal should be getting the guys you need to fill a couple of holes. You don't need it to fill your entire roster. Now, in the short term, yeah. In the short term, if however many guys transferred out, they're transferred out, and you got to replace that many spots, yeah, you got to ride that portal, hard as you can ride it. But the goal is to get to you're plugging holes with the portal as opposed to and losing guys in small numbers to the portal as opposed to trying to cover big numbers, trying to keep 15 guys from leaving while trying to plug 17 spots,
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, that's a long-term answer, and we don't know. And it's all still so new, and there's no rules, right? And so what's this going to look like 3 years from now? I have no idea. So it's a really long way of saying that I think you're right. I think if there's one thing you need to work on is the high school recruiting. But you know what helps with that? Is winning 11, 12 games a year,
True.
And being in the national conversation.
What is your stance on the SEC potentially adding more teams and even a step further having a super conference that would be different from what we call Division I now?
My father was a long time college football official, but he also was a long time college administrator. That was his day job. He was a Division II college president, Wingate University in North Carolina, and he used to sit on these NCAA committees 20 years ago. And he would be the D2 rep, and then it would be Father whomever from Notre Dame, and it would be Gordon Gee from Ohio State, and it would be all these presidents from all these other big schools. And my dad would come home and say, they're all going to break away one day. And so I've always in my mind.
How long ago was this?
25 years.
Wow.
I wrote a story in ESPN the magazine. I had to go back and look it up. I wrote a story in ESPN the magazine. It was at least a decade ago. And it was about that, about one day it's all going to super conferences and maybe a super conference. And it's the history of college sports, right? For folks that don't know, the NAIA used to run everything. And the NAIA its office is still across the street from the old NCAA offices in Kansas City because the NCAA went across the street and started their own deal because they didn't like how the NAIA was doing things. And so one day something like that is going to happen, only with football. The NCAA, no one wants to run the championships. No one wants to do all these things, but there will be some form of the NCAA. But football-wise, I think that's coming. I don't like it. I mean, I don't. What I worry about is, and I've written these stories before. I was having this conversation a minute ago. I covered motorsports forever. And what did NASCAR do? They were making so much money in the 2000s that they could make a lot of really bad decisions, and it didn't matter. Like, they didn't know they were making bad decisions. And I worked at NASCAR for a couple of years, and Brett Yormark, new commissioner of the Big 12, was one of the people in the room making the decisions. And he'll tell you, if you get too far away from your identity, you don't have an identity. And so if you make these decisions assuming that the loyalists are just going to continue to be loyalists, you better be careful, because one day you'll wake up, and if they don't recognize their sport anymore, they'll go find something else to do. And it's hard to wrap your brain around that. But, if you create a world where Tennessee and Alabama aren't playing every year, and you create a world where, the possibility of a big cross-conference game in November goes away or whatever, and now the playoffs got all this, and the season starts in the middle of August and it ends at the end of January, I don't even know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that don't like college football to me. And so that's what you got to be careful with. So that's a really long way of saying change is inevitable. If you're Greg Sankey, you have to take Texas and Oklahoma, or you get fired. I mean, if they are expressing interest, you have to take them. I get that, but you also have to recognize where do you slow down a little bit, because if you just keep making decision after decision after decision after decision, you can't assume that the old folks with the gray hair that pay for everything will stick around, right?
True. Okay, so let me ask you this: if you were the czar of college football, would you have stopped it at the BCS? Would you have stopped at the 4-game playoff? Now the 12-game playoff? Obviously, you wouldn't go bigger based on what you said. Where would you have stopped?
I like 8. I like a divisible number. I don't like buys. I think buys are NFL. My biggest thing is I like the NFL fine. I'm a college football guy. What I don't like is I don't like for my Saturdays to look like Sundays. If I wanted to watch Sunday football, I watch Sunday football. I don't. I watch Saturday football. And when you start talking about buys in a playoff, and you start talking about essentially wild cards, and you start talking about, a national conference that's divided down the middle, it's the NFL. Mm-hmm. And a season that starts, in August and ends in January, it's the NFL. And that's not what I want. I want Saturday football. And so that's the thing, when bowl games no longer are a thing, and it all just feeds into a playoff, that's the NFL. Yeah. And I don't want to watch the NFL. And so I don't think it's going to fully get there. At least I hope. I have all the confidence in the world, Greg Sankey. But you also have to do the things that you need to do to make sure that you survive and that you don't become the ACC. And the conversations are we even going to be here 5 years from now? And so I get it, but it's just don't forget. To me, that's the challenge. Yeah.
Are there any other schools that if they came calling, you feel like Greg Sankey would have to take?
I mean, I live in North Carolina. I was born in North Carolina, raised in North Carolina. There's all this noise now about North Carolina or Clemson or some of these. But at the end of the day, what I've learned is I'm in Florida State. But what I've learned is that it's about new markets. But I also know that in the SEC, there is a super, super high regard for the footprint. You add Oklahoma and Texas, you really only went about 90 miles west. That's it.
Yep.
It's not what the Big Ten did, which I hate so much. I get it. I know why they did it.
I hate it as well.
Yeah, I hate it. And everybody on the West Coast, USC and UCLA fans hate it. And so, if I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if the University of North Carolina comes calling, you got to answer that phone call. It is one of the most recognizable brands in collegiate athletics. The problem North Carolina would have is that they're used to kind of being the Alabama of their conference, or the USC or the Ohio State. Everything kind of runs through them ultimately, right? That's how they feel. And they're not going to like sitting in a room full of people that don't know anything about them. But if UNC calls, you have to return that phone call. You have to. You're adding a whole other state. You're adding a whole other market. You're adding a super high brand name. And who the second team is, I don't know. Virginia Tech, I don't know.
Maybe Notre Dame.
But Notre Dame's a whole other thing.
That's right. Let me ask you this last thing. We're about the same age. The first Tennessee player I remember being a fan of was Johnny Jones, running back.
Yeah.
Who's the first Tennessee player you remember tugged at your heart?
Willie Gault.
Willie Gault.
Willie Gault. I ran track, so I loved Willie because Willie wasn't just, Willie ran in the Olympics. Willie at one time was a world record holder. So for me, I love like Ronaldo Nehemiah and James Jett at West Virginia. I love those guys, the crossover guys. But yeah, Willie Gault was my guy. I remember watching Tennessee on a Saturday afternoon. Again, I grew up in the Carolinas, and watching Tennessee on a Saturday afternoon on the old turf, and Willie's dressed head to toe in orange, running against that green turf, and he looked like a comet. It was unbelievable. Johnny Majors is my all-time favorite Vol, always will be. But Willie was the first one. I was like, look at this guy. It looked like a blur on that old tube TV. Yes. It was a blur, right? He was my guy. Yeah.
Great stuff. You got books out left and right.
Yeah.
Tell us about how people can follow your work.
Got a new one, Welcome to the Circus of Baseball. It's about the right out of Tennessee. I got a job as a $100 a week intern for the Asheville Tourists. just over the state line over in Asheville. And I wrote a book about the summer I worked for the Asheville. It was the summer in between college and when I started at ESPN. And, you know, I mean, we all have these jobs, right? $100 a week, broke, most fun I ever had, right? Living in a retirement home because the only apartment we could afford, but it was the best, most fun I ever had. And it was, but yeah, almost got killed by the tarp, almost got drowned by a Dairy Queen machine. You know, that was the summer Michael Jordan played minor league baseball. It was the summer of O.J. Simpson. They shot the movie Richie Rich in Asheville when we were there. Oh, it's like Forrest Gump. Like I'm interacting with all these people. Yeah, welcome to the circus of baseball. If you love America and you love baseball, Knoxville Smokies get a couple shout outs in there.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm so romantic. My first real date with my wife was I took her to Bill Meyer Stadium to see Carlos Delgado play for the Knoxville. I guess maybe the Blue Jays then. But yeah,
it's a good cheap date right
there.
There
you go, dude. $5.
He is Ryan McGee, Off the Hook Sports. More Tennessee coverage? We got it. We just talked to Ryan McGee, a Tennessee graduate, now with ESPN. How about Braden Gall coming up next with 440 Sports? He's covered Tennessee for the Sports Animal and various other entities. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button. If you haven't liked already, do so. Set the notifications on because coming up today, we will have interviews with the players representing Tennessee. Quarterback Joe Milton, defensive lineman Amari Thomas, and also our own Jacob Warren, Tennessee tight end Josh Heupel as well. Braden Gall up next with Caleb Calhoun and Caleb Jarreau. I'm Dave Hooker, Off the Hook Sports. Joined by Braden Gall, the owner of 440 Sports, and he happens to be the host as well. All kinds of podcasts on there. And I have to be honest, I called Braden and spoke to him for probably about 100 hours over the course of a month. He was very helpful in getting Off the Hook Sports going. And a lot of things you've done, I've pretty much copied. You're tremendous. I don't mind saying it. You've done a tremendous job. I appreciate the time.
No, happy to be here. Talking season, you know, we got Tennessee Day coming up. So, no. Happy to be here. Happy to help. And I think you're giving me way too much credit. Honestly. No, I'm not. No, I was actually at one point going to start cutting you a consultant check. But I won't turn that down.
Tell us what's happening at 440 Sports for those that don't know.
So we are a independent Nashville media company that hosts shows that cover everything in the Nashville market and Tennessee as a state. So we cover SEC football. We've got a show, Fringe Element, where we talk all SEC football every single episode. We've got a bunch of different Titan shows. We've got a podcast called Football and Other F Words, which covers the Tennessee Titans, Music City Audible. We've got a show called A Football Show, which is very creative. You can catch us live on the YouTube page Mondays and Thursdays. That's a Titans and SEC sort of combo show. Myself and Zach Lyons. We've got a show that covers the Nashville Predators, the Gold Standard. We've got a show that covers Nashville SC, Club and Country. We've got a media show called Lamestream Sports. We've got all kinds of stuff. If it happens in Middle Tennessee or the state of Tennessee in the SEC or in professional sports, we sort of try to cover it. We do it all digitally. It's all on demand, and fans can come and go as they choose. And I've worked in all different types of mediums, magazines, radio, etc. But like I've had the most fun putting this project and this company together. And I think the fans have responded, sponsors have responded, and we deliver really high quality content that we call it no empty calories. It's all nutritional content. It's long form conversations. It's in-depth analysis, and we're having fun doing it. So check out all of those things I just mentioned.
No, I love it. And I wanted to get because you have your finger on the pulse of the mid-state area, which I think maybe 3 years ago, hands down, was a Titans area, Tennessee Titans. They would have the majority, I would think, of the share of your audience. And then UT comes in, and they've been a presence before, but now with Josh Heupel, how does that change the dynamic of the sports world in Nashville?
So the Titans, I love this question because I'm fascinated by what people are interested in.
Me too.
And so when I moved to Tennessee in 1997, Nashville was a Tennessee volunteer market, number one, obviously, and NASCAR. Those are the two things that the city paid attention to a lot. SEC football and NASCAR were top two. And then in the late 90s, we vote as a city to bring the Titans. We build what is now Bridgestone Arena and bring the Preds. And we decided to become a professional sports town. That happened to coincide with Tennessee kind of becoming a mess, University of Tennessee becoming a mess. The night we drove old Kiffy down is basically when that started. And so what the Titans still dominate ratings on the whole by like insane margins. But what happened is we became like an Alabama market right around 2007. I don't know how that worked out, but
it was Mike Shula.
The power T's started disappearing off the cars, and the script A's started showing up, and Alabama was the big draw in the market. University of Tennessee still did very well, but it was the big Alabama games that would get the biggest ratings. So we kind of became like this weird, like, I think there's a lot of bandwagon fans that just sort of started showing their A's a little bit more around town. And this past year, all this rambling to get to, the Titans pull about 22s, 23s in our market, which is about 250,000 people, which is about a third of the market, a little less than a third of the market. They would win the top 16 or 17 now, most watched sporting events in the city would be Tennessee Titans games. Last year, the two highest rated sporting events in the city was Tennessee Bama and Tennessee Georgia.
Wow.
Those were the high. So it still is a Tennessee Titans market, but Tennessee Volunteers football has now become because Josh Heupel's offense is entertaining, because they're competitive. And again, we haven't seen it sustain for 10 years, but in this one season, it's been, they kind of jumped back into the fray, and college football as a whole was elevated. So a lot more games in the 12s, 13s, 15s, 18s ratings points wise. People are watching the Iron Bowl at a high level. People are watching Georgia, Florida at a high level. All these games. Tennessee, Pittsburgh was one of the top 15 games in the market, and that includes all college football games, right? That includes Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, everything. Tennessee Pitt last year was one of the top most watched games in Nashville. So it's still, NFL is still bigger. It just is. I can't explain it, but really good, important Tennessee Volunteer football games are now competing with the NFL, not beating the NFL, at least last year. And we'll see if Heupel's offense and the team this year can match it, because if they're good again, there's no reason to think Bama, Tennessee, and Bama, Georgia won't also still be very highly rated games in 2023.
Yeah, and how big is that, do you think, for Josh Heupel for, we say fundraising, but really we're talking about NIL now.
Right,
that was a term we'd used 10 years ago. But we're talking about NIL that could potentially come from the mid-state area and recruiting as the area continues to grow in population size.
It used to be 100 people per day were moving to Nashville from about 05 to like 2015. It was 100 people per day moving to Nashville. That's only going to up the chance at recruits, right? At increasing the recruiting population. The move south into the Sun Belt's been well documented from Pennsylvania and Ohio and California now. But we're down to about 40 people a day, but we're still bringing in 40 people a day into the city of Nashville, which is only going to increase the recruiting base in general in the city. And then Josh Heupel staying good and relevant. That's where your dollars come in for NIL and the money goes up. What I always say, though, to people, and I'm shocked. I've had a lot of arguments with like Kentucky folks over this. Excuse me. Tennessee's recruiting base, the 6-hour radius around Knoxville, which is largely the number one indicator of where a player is going to go. And I've talked to a lot of players actually recently about NIL money, and it's less of the money starting to level out. So it's starting to go back to more traditional decision making, where you decide on relationship with coach, geography, system, and that because the money's starting to even out, right? Like Auburn and Tennessee and Alabama and Florida are all offering about the same amount of money now. So it goes back to the regular stuff, right? It goes back to recruiting. Offensive system, right, is where Josh Heupel would sell this. But the 6-hour radius around Knoxville, I would attest, has been significantly better every step of the way than it ever gets credit for. You can get almost to Richmond, Virginia, Valdosta, Georgia, almost Jackson, Mississippi, Ohio, West Virginia. You can get all of North Carolina, all of North Georgia, and all of that population has moved down into that. So that radius, which was underrated in 1998, let's say, is even more underrated now because it's even stronger and deeper. When I was in high school in 99, I played ball in Nashville. There were 5 Power 5 prospects in the mid-state area. Now there are 35 that signed. The 35th guy now gets a Mississippi State offer. And I was the 35th guy in 1999, and I got a Tennessee Tech offer. that's the difference in the growth of the recruiting base, and I think it's still going up. Like we're still flying high, and that includes Huntsville, that includes Kentucky, that includes all the areas that are within 6 hours of Knoxville. I think it's a great recruiting base, and it's not as good as Georgia's. Like Georgia has a better recruiting base, Florida has a better recruiting base, but it's still way better than 90% of college football teams, and I think that's slept on a lot in the conversation about Tennessee's ability to land top 15 classes.
Well, and I think you would agree, too, that right now it's a bit of a cosmopolitan town in terms of people moving in. But if Josh Heupel's able to have success, sustain success, you can make it a Tennessee town. I use, for instance, my son, who's 18. He doesn't know Tennessee being a good program ever. I mean, he doesn't remember that. If you can have that sort of sustained success, I believe you have success 8-10 years down the line in recruiting in Nashville.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like it's so funny to hear somebody say Nashville is so cosmopolitan. It's certainly gotten that way. Relative to Knoxville, it certainly is that. Relative to Atlanta, it's not even close to that, right? So it's all relative. But you're right about the sort of the growth of the town and the market and what it's going to be. And I don't think it takes, like, to your point, like when I think of the SEC theme song, when I think of the CBS music, I think of Florida versus Tennessee. Like that's what I think about. When you first hear that music, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Your son probably thinks Alabama or Georgia, right? Like when he hears that music, it's going to trigger a different memory than if you grew up in middle school and high school in the 90s, like I did. Sorry to date myself. But that is, even just last year, seeing them in those moments. Now, again, it'll be on ESPN in a couple of years, so it's a little different. But the point being that when they get to like 3 or 4 years, yes, that happens. Yes, it starts to ingrain into younger generations. But I honestly, this is where I have had so many arguments with people. Like, Tennessee didn't go anywhere. Like, they weren't, like, they made bad decisions. And every program makes bad decisions. They just continually made bad decisions. And now they've made good decisions. And now they're back to being relevant again because of that. And some of it was self-inflicted. Some of it was at the donor level. Some of it was at the president of the university level. Some of it was the 8th athletic director. Plenty of bad coaches that were hired that should never have been hired. But no program is immune to bad decision-making. So I don't think you need the 8 years of success to teach the younger generation. I think you've already done it with beating Alabama and beating Bryce Young with Hendon Hooker, as long as you stay aligned with the right people in charge, which I think they've done with Donde Plowman, Danny White, and Josh Heupel. That's alignment. That's consistency. They're all pulling in the right direction. I don't think it takes 10 years to do that. I think it takes resources and fans and good recruiting base, and they have all of that. They've never not had all of that. They just kept hiring bad people for the job. And now they've hired good ones, and now it's lined up. Ask any program. The only ones that haven't done it are like Ohio State and maybe Oklahoma. But like other than that, USC's had tons of bad hires. Texas can't win. Texas should have all the national championships. They screwed up all the time. It took Georgia 40 years to win a national championship. Florida has hired a bunch of knuckleheads as well. Like, you're not immune to this.
Maybe one now.
I think Napier is actually really good. So
okay.
As he just walked by a minute ago, I'm not saying that because of him, but I think he's doing it the right way. Is he going to get to enjoy the fruits of his labor? That remains to be seen. But I think he's doing it the right way, building out the massive infrastructure and everything that Florida Dan Mullen and Will Muschamp just clearly didn't allow him to have. I just think it's about good people, and no program is immune to bad decisions. Tennessee made a bunch of bad decisions. They're back making good ones, and let's see what happens from here on out. I think Tennessee fans should be excited. It doesn't mean they're going to win 10 games this year, but I think Tennessee fans should be excited about the future because of the organizational structure that they now have.
Braden, thanks not only for these few moments, but a lot of great insight. Check out 440 Sports. I'm Dave Hooker, Off the Hook Sports. Braden Gall of 440 Sports. I'll remind you, go to crafttreats.com. Crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. That's Off the Hook. Get 20% off your pet treats. That includes the CBD treats that will help with your pet's digestive issues, or how about arthritis issues or anxiety issues. Crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. Crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. Some thoughts on SEC Media Days after this. Stay tuned. Off the Hook Sports.
Sun, sand, and salt water, the beach is a very relaxing place. Unless you wear contacts. Ow! Open your eyes to the best the beach has to offer with LASIK vision correction from Campbell Cunningham Laser Center.
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Dare to compare.
Our family has been creating one-of-a-kind pieces of jewelry in West Knoxville since 1986. Each piece is a combination of unique processes that bring your idea to life. Every day in our shop, a truly special item with a story all its own is being manufactured in our facility, bringing the history and family sentiment into a whole new generation of life. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler, a title that we value and respect. Because to me, being a jeweler and owning a jewelry store are not the same thing. I'm Rick Terry, I'm a jeweler, and we want to be your jeweler. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut, and downtown on Gay Street right next to the Tennessee Theater.
When you want a hard cider that's easy to enjoy, one that's crafted to perfection, you need Tennessee Cider Company. Some say it's the signature cider of the South. Others say it's the cure to your craving. They all say you'll savor every sip. With a selection of ciders free to sample, all it takes is one taste. Visit tncidercompany.com for more information, as well as to shop our ciders and merchandise online. Thirsty yet? Doors open at 10 a.m.
Day 4, SEC Media Days with Caleb Calhoun and Caleb Jarreau. I am Dave Hooker, and this means Tennessee, and some guy named Lane from Oxford, Mississippi. That's what Day 4 means, so make sure you've got those notifications on. You've subscribed and liked, because we've got a ton coming up throughout the rest of the day, and a big show on Friday with several special guests that we're looking forward to, including a preview of Florida and more. We'll also visit with several of the media personalities there at the at SEC Media Days in Nashville, Tennessee. Let's talk a little bit about some feedback that we got from some teams that have been at SEC Media Days. In particular, I want to talk about the SEC East with Caleb Jarreau, who has had the print room absolutely manned. They call it the main room now because nobody prints anymore. But Kentucky's saying what?
Yeah, so several Kentucky players, when I asked about last year's Tennessee game, said that they just weren't mentally focused going into
It looks like
stadium. So they said that the rough season, Will Levis was dealing with some injury. It kind of all weighed on the team, and it caused them to lack mental focus. But on the flip side of that, they made sure to say that this season will be different. They'll be ready this year. When Tennessee goes to Lexington, it's almost like they're going for that revenge game.
What do you make of that, Calhoun? Is that good to have an excuse, or is it dumb to say that?
I think it's dumb to say that, not because it's going to fire Tennessee up or anything like that. I think Tennessee dominates Kentucky anyway, but I think that does anybody who watched that game really believe that a lack of focus cost Kentucky in that one? I mean, that's a really hilarious thing to say.
You know, actually, I did think they lacked a little bit of focus. I just thought the whole season, because of Will Levis injuries, Will Levis poor play, I thought they were ready for the season to be over.
Yeah, but if anybody had a reason to not focus that game, it would have been Tennessee, because Georgia was the next week.
Well, I mean, I'm not making excuses for them. Whether it's focus or listless, whatever word you want to use, it was something. I mean, I think we all can agree that they didn't play their best game. Is that fair to say?
I mean,
whatever the excuse is, I mean,
I think Tennessee made them. I'm not one of those people who says people play sloppy all the time, but I think Tennessee made Kentucky not play their best game in that one.
You can blame Will Levis injuries. That may have caused them to lose focus. He only threw for 98 yards that game, but the defense did not help them in any way in that game either. Hooker had his way. I think 3 touchdown passes that game, over 300 yards. So Will Levis play, yes, it contributed. They didn't score, but they still gave up 40, 50 points to Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm not downplaying the way Tennessee played. Don't get me wrong, but do I think if that game were played 10 more times, I think that Kentucky, surely to goodness, if their lives depended on it, would play better. I mean, they look like they were mailing it in isn't the right word, but they looked like they were pretty much done. And a lot of people, including Chris Lowe, who said early in the program, thinks that Kentucky could be a bounce back team. We'll see. Zen Sports is the new sports book in Tennessee, revolutionizing the way you earn sports betting rewards. That means no more deposit bonuses that turn into deposit nightmares. On Zen Sports, what you see is what you get. And with their cash rewards program, you get a lot of cash. For a welcome bonus, earn an unlimited 5% cash back on your betting volume for your first 15 days when you sign up with code HOOK. That's the promo code HOOK. That's right, unlimited 5% cash back. Keep betting. Keep earning with up to 3% cash back on your betting volume every month after that, and refer friends to earn a percentage of their betting volume as cash rewards as well. Zen Sports bringing the cash back to Tennessee. So if you bet big on sports, you want to be betting on Zen Sports. Zen Sports betting just got better. Let me ask you, Kayla Calhoun, the one thing that stood out about your first SEC Media Days, I'm somewhat embarrassed to say, I think this is 25 for me, and then I'll get to you, Jarreau. But the first thing that stood out to you, or the most prominent thing, is as we look back over the week. That doesn't mean we won't have more coverage on Friday. Several interviews didn't make the cut of our first 4 days. But your thoughts, what do you take away from SEC Media Days?
Nashville's got to update their infrastructure, man. They're building way too fast, and it was way too hard to get to the Grand Hyatt for an event.
That's fair. Jarreau, what do you take away?
He did take mine. I was going to say maybe not schedule the concert outside in the evening in Nashville with the weather. Last night, the Midland concert got rained out. Fan Fest. I'm sure Tennessee fans who were in Nashville were looking forward to that. That got rained out as well. SEC Nation had to move inside. So I feel like maybe the SEC needs to learn how to control the weather and make next year a little better.
Yeah, based off some early mornings, I think some SEC media members need to maybe learn how to control their consumption of alcohol the night before. It was a rough couple of mornings for some of the media members. I did notice that. No one here, but a couple were struggling early in the morning. So a Friday, just a monstrous show as well. We'll have a ton of interviews from SEC Media Days. We certainly thank everyone that made it possible for us to be here in Nashville, and it'll be Dallas next time. But I tell you what, it's been quite the week. SEC Media Days. Yes, Caleb Calhoun, what were you saying?
Oh, no, I was going to say that before we get out of here, Jarreau wanted to bring up something I saw about Florida and Neyland Stadium and the swamp and what was said.
Yeah, so Florida wide receiver Ricky Purcell told a little story today during his breakout session. He said when he came out of the huddle for the first play at Neyland Stadium, he just busted out laughing. He just couldn't hold it in. He had no idea that Neyland Stadium would be that loud. He said it compared to the swamp, but make sure to note that nothing is better than the swamp, but that Tennessee fans caught him completely off guard with the noise that night. Because if you think about it, a lot of these players haven't played in Neyland in full capacity because it was in the swamp in 21, and then 20, it was 50% capacity. So it's a very quiet stadium.
It's a great point. We'll see if Tennessee can enjoy that home crowd environment against Georgia. I think Chris Lowe brought up a great point. He said he thought that Tennessee needed to beat one of the big three last year for the 2022 season to be considered a success. That's Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. They beat two of those. If they do so again this year, that would be incredible. If they can beat all three, probably playing for a national title. For the Calebs,